Recording in progress.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight, here to host with you once again. We're talking about some interesting developments in the world of psychology. It's breaking news. You know, everything's breaking news now since the advent of the 24-hour news cycle. That's not what we're talking about, though. I am really excited today to be joined by your friend and mine. In fact, especially mine, because we've known each other for a long time. Doug Nielsen is here with me. I have Doug Nielsen's coaching and counseling. And, you know, we've known each other long enough that we just did one of those catch-ups of, boy, how long has it been since we even talked? And yet it's like it was yesterday. We're at that, we've known each other that long to where it's like just seen each other, boy, around all over the place here. Doug is actually in an office just down the street from me, and yet we're still on Zoom, you know, technology, am I right? But with scheduling and such. Anyway, it's interesting to be talking to someone who's in the same time zone as me. Because trust me, no one is in the mountain time zone and no one has heard of it unless they live in it. So Doug, welcome.
Hey, it is my pleasure to be here, Dwight. I mean, with the man, the myth, the legend.
I've talked about having you on here for a little while, and it's interesting how
years.
I know it has been, right? I realized that I've been doing the show now this is the 10th year officially of
your
it.
10-year anniversary.
Yeah, it's been a while. Got to think of something. I think that's 10 TIN, right? Or something like that. I don't know what it is on the anniversary scale, but silver? No, is that? I don't know what, you know.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do something. We'll do, or rather I'll forget and then do it next year for the 11th. And that'll be good. So anyway, Well, I was really intrigued to talk to you in regards to a lot of things that are going on in the field. And it's funny, I've been wanting to have you on anyway to talk about kind of your career track is one that I think is a really good example of diversification within our field, right, of counseling, because for years and years, and when I knew you were doing a lot of this, for years and years, you've done not only psychotherapy and counseling, but also motivational speaking, of going around and being, you're one of those guys who gets up and owns the room in a big retreat or conference or keynote, right? Yep. Are we using the right terminology?
Absolutely. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. And
been doing it for quite some time now. You're right.
It was always very, it was one of those things that when I met you and then learned that about you, that to me at that point, I was kind of like, wow, that's like this, I don't know, this conception that I had in my head of what that was like. And now having met a lot of people through the podcast and stuff like that, it's an amazing little world. How did you get into that, by the way? Did you go into that before, after, or during going into mental health?
Probably all the above. I remember, getting out of graduate school, and I've always had an interest. Long story short, I called Steve Covey back in the day, that 7 Habits of the guy's an untouchable guy. Long story short, I had a conversation with him, and I was trying to debate whether to go into the organizational behavior, organizational psychology, or doing clinical social work, psychotherapy. And he didn't, like in true Covey fashion, he didn't answer and tell me what to do. He said, I'm convinced the cream always rises to the top. You've got to follow what you feel. And anyway, long story short, I went the clinical social work, psychotherapy route, and had a friend said, hey, do you speak to organizations? I've always had an interest in speaking, didn't know how I was going to get into it. And I found that, hey, if you take the next step and then deal with what shows up, and this was one of those steps, take the next step and then see what shows up. A buddy came and said, hey, can you come speak to our transportation, UTA, the bus and subway and all that, or trains and such. And I said, sure. And can you talk on stress? And I'm like, absolutely. That's I love talking on that. Anyway, this was years back in the 90s, and I stepped into it and got paid doing it. And I thought, wow, I need to find out a little bit more about this on a professional level. And that's what started me into the talk to Covey. Says, yeah, go for it. And then gave that first speech. I got paid. Now it wasn't much, but for me, it was like, wow. Mm-hmm. So that was the journey in.
Just kind of the concept of, I think at first, right, the concept of being at all, right, for that kind of thing of being like, because it is something we're taught, we're I don't know if our graduate program is very inclusive, we're taught group therapy, right? Or maybe family therapy, but
Yeah,
basically it's an individualized kind of a deal. We're trained towards the idea of kind of digging in and working with that intensity with one person.
that's
But
right.
yet it lends itself. And that was actually one of the things that I found interesting about getting into the podcasting those years ago was at the time, this is not the case anymore. At the time, there weren't very many mental health podcasts, particularly that oriented around doing therapy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I felt like people in this world of clinical mental health, I found so many people that were doing kind of cutting edge things or were just interesting people with an interesting way of looking at the world.
Hmm.
And I will say that, a lot of the ones that were there were kind of academic dry. There were maybe somebody broadcasting their own trainings for continuing education credits or things like that for people in the field. And there were a couple for people interested in the field that were, frankly, a little dry, and their names are no, I'm just kidding. But I don't know if they're still around. But getting into that and saying like, I think we have something to say to the greater population or whatever. But then what did you find was a switch as far as the skill set and things? Were you already into public speaking and such?
I'd always loved to speak. I didn't know what that meant after I got out of graduate school until my buddy invited me. And then I've always been into the motivation, the psychology, and that I was always drawn to that. And so that idea of, hey, take the next step and follow what's there. And I recall years back seeing you speak, and I cannot remember what group it was, but it was a group you were speaking to, and I loved your style. For those who have never seen Dwight speak, he's an amazing speaker. And as far as therapist wise, I mean, arguably one of the best around, but your creativity. I still remember your creativity. And I came up and talked to you after. I said, talk to me about this because you have, anyway, we're not here to, but I'm props to you.
We're not here to coach me, but hey, maybe we should be.
Right. But I just saying props to you because you get that. And so there was a kind of a fire, kind of a calling that, yeah, we're trained to work one-on-one. But what I found that if I can work with somebody one-on-one and really become a student and an expert of what helps people to truly change. I mean, when you're selling somebody, maybe that's not the correct word, on not killing themselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, talk about a sales job, right? When they're getting, and then I found that, hey, if I can do that and use these tools, in one-on-one, I can use this with larger groups. Now, granted, it's different. We're not getting into trauma and all that kind of thing, but I could be in Puerto Rico with CEOs of billion-dollar companies, and I'm going to take tools that work in the psychotherapy world, mm-hmm. trauma tools, any tool that works, I'm going to take and use it in my keynotes and all kinds of different experiential things, psychodrama kind of things, because if it works in the real world, I'm going to try to use it from the stage to 1,000 people, 500 people, or 50.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I had heard somebody had told me a while back, and this was along that lines of too, giving leadership trainings and executive coaching or what I don't know if I hear the term organizational psychology, right? People throw it around as much. It used to be. I feel like I heard it more commonly, but basically they said that one of the things is applying the belief, because now that's probably there's more, and it's kind of, people talk about it more, but as far as training and things that are tailored for that. But at the time, when we're talking, this was, I think we had just, before I hit record, we were saying with the concept of coaching, which I want to get into, was that before it was cool, right? Getting into that and learning like, okay, how does this work? What is this? And they had just basically said the main thing was having the confidence that what we have been taught is applicable to people on a grand scale, or whatever scale you want to do it. And if you have the confidence if this selling's not a bad word, because you get out there and say, I'm selling everyone on the idea that they can change and find success or happiness or whatever it is. And having the belief of that, if you have that, it works pretty well. And if you don't have that in and of yourself, so there's a lot to confront in yourself, right? Of saying, do I have the confidence that I do have something to say while still
I think that's
being
the core of it.
Yeah.
You've hit it right on the core. If, it's like we can't over time behave different than the way we see ourselves at our core. because that core is going to self-align, right? I mean, it's our guiding compass, that reticular activating system in our brain. But if we're able to look at those fears and be able to conquer and say, no, I really do believe I have something to give. And a person starting out, you go from free to fee. You start speaking at churches, you start speaking at Rotary clubs, you start speaking at chambers of commerce, anywhere that you can find a group to help you hone the craft, even joining Toastmasters, highly recommended. Ultimately, then joining National Speakers Association. And that's your path to really getting into the speaking arena.
Yeah. Yeah, and having that opportunity to do it, because it takes a belief in yourself even to say that. I remember just even going into private practice, working in community mental health. For years, if you're a counselor, people usually say things like, "Hey, do you take private clients? Do you do this? Do you do that? Do you?" And for after years of being like, "No, not really. Someday, maybe." I was toying with it and trying to, and then I had somebody turn next to me at a training. Someone who I knew not well, but knew someone who worked at the community mental health clinic where I worked, turned to me and said, "Hey, do you take private clients? I have this family member, and I think you'd be a good match." And I found that I heard myself saying, "Yeah, sure." Just getting into it now. And which I was like, okay, I already knew kind of somebody who had an office that I could probably use. And, I was like, I could do this. And I've been wanting to do it for a while. And then they had insurance and I didn't really even know. And I had to get credential their insurance, which is not how you're supposed to, that's not the order of things. Right. But there comes a point where you say yes to something and then, something can happen. That's interesting.
And then follow what's there. Absolutely.
Yeah. What did you bring into it being, well, let's talk about coaching a little bit too, because you started using that and embracing that, because the idea of coaching or life coaching, that's been around for a minute before social media really gave a platform for people to kind of start talking about what it was or meant. If that at first it was seen as kind of a extra. I think it was seen as kind of a trendy extra thing or whatever at first. How did you start using, because you've been using that term for a long time?
Yeah. I started when I was working with a particular company at the time. This is probably about 2001, 2002-ish, somewhere in there. And I'm coaching a leader. And he said to me, because I've been doing the corporate coaching, since really about then. And he asked me, says, "So do you do personal kind of life kind of coaching? Because I would like to, do some personal coaching, maybe get my wife involved." And I had one of those Dwight moments like, sure. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm going, what is it? I know the corporate coaching. I get that end of it, but he's going, yeah, I just like to do some things, focus on some of my personal stuff. I'm like, yeah. And then I, like you, figured out let's do it. And that was my foray into quote unquote life coaching. And then from there, because there are people who don't quite fit the criteria. I'd look at it, from 0 to 50 is clinical clinical service, right? Counseling. 51 to 100 then becomes coaching. And yeah, go ahead. You were going to
tell people. So what do you mean then when you say, are you talking about just level of functional goals or level of what you're getting, so 0 to 50, you're talking more kind of like that distress tolerance, survival, building skills kind of thing, or?
Yeah, where I'm not, quote unquote, I'm not functioning. I meet a clinical diagnosis for, say, anxiety or depression, that 0 to 50. I might be suicidal, having suicidal ideation, that type of thing. And where we go to 51 to 100, then it's like, and now granted, I know that 50 to 51 it can be a little bit gray, but it's very clear that, hey, if somebody has some heavy clinical, it's like, yeah, you're not a candidate for coaching. Because coaching is forward-looking more so than, say, counseling, right? Often in counseling, we're looking at the problems and the history, and you're the sum total of your experiences. And coaching comes in there and says, yeah, we get that, but even more important is that future self that you want to create. We're going to focus a lot of our time on that and your goals of getting there. So there, they're able to then really focus on becoming more than the trauma healing. And so that's kind of the differentiation I look at.
Kind of. So approaching this, coming at it as I think a lot of people at the time, I still see this, and I'll throw this out here too, because I've talked about this on the program, and I've done some short episodes recently about finding a good match if you're looking for a non-therapist coach person, right? And how do you even just to follow on a platform, trying to look for people that have good. So there are these two big camps of coaching that I saw emerging back then. There were people who were either had the training or education in psychology, usually who were psychologists or social workers or clinical mental health counselors, who were getting into this new approach, like you were saying, which I think tied in with the positive psychology movement and right, the whole thing of like, okay, here's what we were already doing, but we're going to reclassify and fine tune on this as advancing goals versus clinical treatment and healing. The other group are people who had a lot of life experience, and I'm going to say there's a little crossover. Some of them had done classes and things too, but mostly this other group are people who had life experiences, something to offer. A lot of them were like former athletes, or a lot of them are just people who were more maybe in that motivational realm, who were either pursuing speaking or other things like that, who were like, yeah, Tony Robbins-esque kind of thing of like, not a clinician, right? Not a background of a clinician either. Now, under that umbrella, you could say the accusation was, oh, you just want to be a therapist, but you don't want to go to school, right? Kind of a thing. And I believe that subcategory exists in there as well, and that's something that people should be cautious of. So that's what I've seen, at least. I'm curious your feelings about that breakdown of people and how that's evolved.
No, I think you're right, and I think that's the thing too. Like when working with a client, it's got to be very clear, right? They'll know that I'm a therapist, but my paperwork and everything, this is not therapy. But I do believe that there are a lot of, people who are kind of where it's looked upon, where's your credibility to be a coach? And there are some good coaching schools, and you can spend quite a bit of money, 25 grand.
Spend more money on a coaching certificate than a counseling degree, depending which institution you go to for either one.
Absolutely. and some of them are great, and others are going, oof. And yeah, you have your celebrities, and one of my credibilities coming in as a speaker is that I do have the psychotherapy background, right? And I go, oh, and then I also have some, challenges that I've overcome in life too, that kind of add credibility as well. But I think, there's that, again, that fine line. And that's the same thing on speaking on the stage or with a coach. You're going to get a vibe pretty quick from somebody. If, 'cause one thought, I'm going to jump the vibe. And I think we're looking at is like in psychotherapy, counseling, often the majority of the focus is on the past. And granted, we know that trauma impacts us, but in coaching, it's going to be more on the future. But often I find therapists that all they do is just focus on that past, and we need to heal that. But holy smokes, the point isn't just to heal. I want to be healed. The point is to go live your life alive. It's not, you don't just go to counseling to overcome and heal. Do you follow me? It's like,
oh, absolutely. No. Yeah.
Now we've got to focus on living the life you want. And so even in the counseling aspects, there's going to be some of that coaching. Hey, what do you want your life to look like? Let's start getting you some goals, because it's a vision for their future. It's applying their values. And you mentioned positive psychology, and it's like, yeah, right down that line.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Just earlier today, I was talking with somebody about the element of what people have heard me say it on here before, but the kind of approaching addiction particularly, and saying there's a subtraction method to addiction treatment, which is take away the substance. And then there's the addition method, which is add more stuff, add a healthier aspects to our life, add passion and engagement and those things. And essentially what you've done is you crowded out the need, and you're also addressing hopefully the self-medication needs, right? Yes. So because sometimes for many people it's just like, boy, I'm in whatever my life is offering me. I'm just in it. And it's like, maybe I just don't have a lot of engagement or passion or invitation feeling of like, what's like kind of my connection. So I need something. I got to augment, and we get into addictive behaviors and things too. So having that, it is interesting, because I do find also, to your point, a lot of modern trauma techniques and therapies, right? They focus on trying to access the present and have an emotional experience in session through your EDMR and IFS and some of those things, right?
Yeah.
And so it is interesting how there is a bridge into trying to live. And I really like how you're saying that, like the coaching thing is now more oriented towards, setting up the goals or plans or advancing into a future mode. That's an interesting way to look at it. I feel like at some point there are a couple areas where it exploded, and I think fitness was the first one I saw on where I started to see frequent Instagram and then TikTok came along after this too, of reels of people saying like, I'm your fitness coach and I'm going to post daily videos and I'm going to do this, and then it grew into it, and now I see a lot of therapists that are stepping into that space where, for many of them, I don't even know if they still are technically practicing, but there's this crossover. I mean, as far as like, they may not be taking clients, they're trying to move into kind of an influencer mode, which is another category now, right? Of people trying to sell the knowledge or the principles of therapy and counseling, some of whom are actually clinicians who have started to do that. And I think it's caused a lot of discussion about what is and sort of okay for a therapist to do.
Right. I mean, well, for instance, I'm putting together right now a premium package for divorced men. And it's going to be a 3-day intensive. And the whole goal is to take them. I mean, here's another, do I coach? Yes. Do I do speaking? Yes. Do I do these intensives, where an intensive can be with just one person for 3 or 4 days, instead of taking 5, 6, 7, 10 years to go through counseling. You can take them and in a 3 or 4 day period, have some intensive work take place and healing. And I'm taking divorced men here in the near future. This is a new offering I'm putting together, but where they'll go through and have a premium experience. And really, it's all experiential to help them get through the divorce and get on with life. It's kind of like you mentioned a second ago. Stage 1 of addiction is stop the drug. Stage 2 is get a life. And I mean, you said it much more eloquently, but that's how. And that's really what this is. Hey, with men or anyone, it's like, hey, number one, let's get some healing, and number 2, let's step into a new life, right? That tectonic shift of your life can be a great opportunity.
Now,
but I think there's a lot of offerings that way.
Now, one of the things that I've seen, and we've seen this in our state here, and I think some other states are looking at how do they. This will be mostly of interest to people in the industry, but they get into things like licensing or regulation of an industry, and they haven't tried to regulate coaching, or at least they haven't, I don't think, passed anything here as far as regulating if you can or cannot call yourself a coach. However, what they do try to do is sort of nail down where's the line and if you cross into. And so you've got some people, and people have heard them interviewed on here. People come on and will be like, hey, I went and I have either this experience or this degree even, and I write workshops and I have books and I do trainings, and I will even one-on-one tell people, hey, here's some principles with addiction, with trauma, with this, with that. And it's like, but anything beyond like, okay, I want to get into therapy, here's my line. But I think that line can become fuzzy, even with good intentioned people, but definitely with not good intentioned people. And so that's where I see the effort to like say what is actually therapy, so that if it crosses that line into therapy, someone can say, are you trained or licensed to practice therapy? Right. And so I see that coming in, and being licensed to do therapy. Where do you see that line coming in? Does that ever, or just what are your thoughts about that, of how we delineate that for people?
Yeah, I mean, it's that 50 to 51 that we're talking about, right? Where, and I think it's kind of where, number one, if it's, hey, I'm in PTSD, I'm stuck in trauma, I'm not functioning, I'm about to lose my job. I just got my third DUI. Those that level of trauma. Hey, I'm suicidal. Clearly, that does not fit. And I get it. You're right. Being able to delineate that fine line. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some coaches who I've sat back and went, ooh, you are really, I mean, literally trauma coaches,
line,
addiction.
Right.
I mean, this whole nine and going, and I can see at some level, if they're coming in as a wellness coach and they're going to, because there's a lot of energy healers and all kinds of that go back, and it really becomes kind of convoluted. Mm-hmm. But, for me, I think it really is like, what do you want to have happen? What does success look like? And what do you feel is holding you back from that? And then as I hear that, I'm like, sometimes people come in and they want marital counseling and going, well, a lot of insurances won't cover that. You can check. But if neither one of you, quote unquote, are meeting a mental health diagnosis, that would be called insurance fraud. And so we like to shy away from that with everything possible, like because you're not meeting a clinical diagnosis. Mm-hmm. But when you meet a clinical diagnosis, then that takes you the clinical route, and it's not a coaching.
Well, and you see also that's the other factor is a lot of times insurance is there's mixed trends that happen in the field, and I'm seeing a lot of people not taking as much insurance, or they just make that decision not to take insurance in their practice. Mm-hmm. And so you have some now counseling that is sort of a little bit anti-diagnosis. I don't subscribe all the way to that, but I do subscribe to the idea that we over pathologize people with their diagnosis becoming who they are. And so it all really comes down to being purposeful and knowing what you're doing and why. Yeah. I will say that if someone's a client and if you don't know if you're being coached or counseled or where the line is between it, and if you then ask your person, if they're doing, what's the difference and what's the line to where they would change and start to call this counseling. And if they don't have a good answer for that, then caution, proceed with caution, basically, because somebody should know that. Now, with having both, you are in a position of you can flip if you have to and say, yes. Hey, I mean, like you said, there's different, maybe you might have say, sign this clinical paperwork as well, and let's just kind of refocused and you have a very well, it sounds like defined, like, okay, we're in the back 50 now or whatever. So we're going to work on that for a minute to stabilize or something. You have that. And that would be the advantage of having a coach who also is a clinician.
Yeah. And I think to your point, having that conversation up front, mm-hmm. What are they expecting? What are they hoping? And if they're like, well, I just can't get out of bed. I'm about to lose it's like, yeah, that's a pretty clear, mm-hmm. It's just like, what? I just feel a little bit stuck. And I want to get unstuck, and I want to keep moving forward, and I want to have some, a method and ritual that I can continue. Right? You're going, okay, yeah. Then that's I'm depressed, I'm anxious. Okay, yeah. Let's define what that is and how I can best meet that.
And it's not just coaches. I mean, because I've talked to people in my own life who I've had family members that have said something like, "My therapist, blah blah blah," and I wish I could talk to them more than once every few months. And I'll say, that's odd if you're only talking to them. Well, yeah, I go in and we talk for a little bit and they give me my update my prescription and I leave. And I'm like, yeah, I believe you're seeing a psychiatrist for your medication consult. I don't think you're actually, that's probably, if you told that person that you thought of them as your therapist, they would probably tell you they're not. And now that's not their fault. If they don't know, this is how I came in looking for help and they're giving me help. And, if I don't ask or they don't say. And so, so that definition, and I'm not trying to just beat up on all y'all coaches out there because a lot of you are in the audience and a lot of you have been guests. And as something does go forward, there's an explosion. I see some clinicians worry about it. But to be honest, a little of that sometimes is sour grapes. You get someone who's just like, I've had a cool life and I got a cool perspective of I can charge $500 an hour and people pay me to do this thing. And it's like, well, someone over here has slogged through all this time and has all this experience. And it's like, do you know what I mean? I mean, I think sometimes that's probably part of it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting more you're not necessarily getting 5 times better therapy or help from someone who is charming as you are with someone who is you're not necessarily, the value doesn't always go with that, but so it's just a really interesting bent in the field, that is there. I see some crossover too, where I feel like there is a bit of an ethical, like we have to be very careful. I mean, I obviously have an internet presence here. I say things on my podcast I wouldn't say, for example, in a session, generally speaking, if it's something about a little bit more opinionated, or maybe I'd go off about something that just a story wouldn't come up as much in a session or whatever. But as far as keeping it with, I do have to delineate, right? I don't use examples, of specific clients, in stories, obviously things like that. And different things like that. I try to keep it, I don't know, within the certain range of something that would be appropriate that way, I guess. It's hard to know that. But then when you see people, I would say therapists who, they get into super influencer mode and they still bill themselves as a therapist, and they start doing, I don't know, get ready with me videos or something like that. It's like, not to say anybody can't do that, but it's like, do you delineate that it's like, I'm not also then, where's the crossover and how do we make those decisions, I think is a tough question for people, especially in the social media realm,
Yeah.
Really.
That to understand. Thank you. I mean, because you look at it, there are some really awesome coaches, and their whole focus then really, and I think when I'm coaching too, is you mentioned the word value and what's the result you want. What do you want to have happen? What do you want to experience? And that's really, and that becomes kind of the spine that the coach is going to help to follow, right? They're going to help them get that result. And it really, now I'm not saying in therapy, but I think sometimes too, people can get lost in therapy. And I mean, it's like, how long have you been in therapy? Oh, it's probably about 5 or 6 years, and like, what's going on? And I get it that sometimes trauma and other personality disorders and such can take some time, but the idea, I think, that the coaching world really brings in is like, where are we headed? Where's the path? What's the value you want? Because typically with coaching, you are going to pay a lot more than you're going to pay to see a therapist. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you're using insurance or even private pay, and usually it's in a package. Hey, I offer a 3-month package, I offer a 6-month package, I offer a 1-year package. And people are, I believe in it, doing my own work too. I see a coach, I do my work, and and I think it's important. That's an important part of whether a therapist or a coach, that as therapist and coach, hey, we're doing our work too. We're not just like, yeah, I got it all together, I'm good.
Yeah,
right?
That's another, no. I think another thing to be cautious of with that kind of a message. Well, because really that shows, I think, if someone is doing that message, then that's where my little snake oil alarm goes off a bit, to where it's like, oh, look at me, I'm a magical person who's going to teach you to be a magical person or something. Because just like, and I think this is the same in therapy and coaching, you're not actually going to someone who's billing you on, look at my great life that you get to lead also. You're looking at someone who's like, I know how to teach people. Yep. If I go in and get taught someone who's going to teach me a thing, if I get math tutoring, I'm not going to ask them, how well they do at maintaining, managing how many monthly subscriptions they have, if they're organized. That sounds silly, but if we compare that to say, that kind of thing. And also, you throw this in a lot of times, if you are working with someone, it doesn't hurt to know that they have some experience as well, to say their life hasn't been perfect, because otherwise that might be annoying.
I cannot relate to perceived perfection, or I've got it all together. Because the one thing, and I've had opportunity to work with a lot of attorneys, surgeons, I mean, the checker at Walmart and coaching and whatnot, people, $1 billion kind of things, right? A lot of wealth. And the one thing I realize is nobody has it all together. I don't care who you are, right? We're all human, and we're on this journey to continue to grow. And if you ever have a therapist or a coach who thinks they've got it all together, doesn't have the humility to go, that I'm still growing and learning, I would run like crazy away from that person, because that's just not the case, right? We're all we're all in the process of growth. And I just got back. I was in Florida down at a meditation retreat, mindfulness retreat have you heard of the book, The Untethered Soul, with Michael Singer?
Mm-hmm.
Highly recommend it, just to go and be around and learn from him. That constant growth, a great book, The Untethered Soul. And another one he talks about that he wrote is another bestseller. He's been on Oprah, all this kind of thing, but is the surrender experiment and learning how to live in a place of surrender. And, so it's another thing. I was just going to throw this in here. It just popped in my mind. Since 2009, I was one of the co-founders of an organization called Warrior Heart, and it's warriorheart.com. But we take guys, and it's not coaching, nor is it therapy, but I'll tell you what, in a 3-day event, they're going to do some work that would normally take 5 to 10 years, and it's going to be a top 5 experience of their life. And they're going to do some deep work on a spiritual level. And another book recommendation, we do this based on John Eldridge. He wrote this book called Wild at Heart, and it's about the male heart. And a phenomenal book that I would recommend to anyone to read. If you know men, you are a man, it'll help you understand.
Fall into either of those categories.
Yeah, right? Phenomenal.
It's also one of those things I've actually been impressed with. I've been in the periphery and aware of. I've had clients who have gone and done that with you guys, and Lee has been on the show. He hasn't been on the podcast for a long time, but people can dig through the archives and find Lee Messersmith.
And he was heavily involved in that. It's been a few years back, but he was really involved.
And one of the things that I always admire is whenever it's one. Unfortunately, it can be few and far between when you find people who build themselves in that space of working with men's issues that doesn't make a heel turn somewhere in there. You know what I mean? You have to be careful, right? Because you find some of these groups quickly get into either hatred of women or just male, the MRA kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
And so you guys are very good at that.
No,
right. It's a very
absolutely.
Well, and there's a concept.
Faith-based. It's faith-based.
It's also, a faith-based for people who have that kind of, there's a thought process both in faith-based and not as faith-based of what they, but the term a lot of times I'm hearing now is a, not just healthy masculinity, but sacred masculinity as opposed to toxic masculinity. And that's something I've always admired about your group is that you guys, because with men's issues, it's easy there's a lot of resentment of the modern world and things, but then shaping that into a healthy direction of like not being that victim and actually taking ownership of the issues of being strong and kind, as sort of a thing. Yeah. And you guys really do that. I've always been impressed with that. Yeah.
15 years now.
Yeah.
It's been going. Wow.
Yeah.
We're in Alaska. We go back to Virginia, Idaho, Arizona, here in Park City, and yeah.
If you and I keep talking about how long we've been doing things, we're gonna discover that we're old if we're not careful. So
right.
Get Doug to coach me out of that perspective here while we're on. Well, this has been really super good, and I want to give you a chance to also tell people where they follow you and find you online as well as in person, where they can track you and your movements. Give out your GPS coordinates, but also, and this has been it's been a long time since I've forgotten to warn someone about this, but I always like to ask people before they plug themselves, if they have something that they would share with people about a community method of giving back. It could be a good practice, or it could be a nonprofit or a charitable organization that you believe in, or just is there something that you would drop a little tidbit for people to be able to give back to their communities?
Yeah. And the one that is warriorheart.com. We're a nonprofit. And
I thought you guys were. I didn't want to presume.
Yeah, we are a nonprofit, and really now I also believe and involved in church and giving that way. And I think we do need to give the community. Taught underprivileged kids karate for years, right? I'm not doing it any longer. Life got a little bit too crazy, but I think actively we sometimes forget in the me-centered world that the importance of giving back and contributing. And in fact, I don't believe we can have a legitimate claim on peace without contribution and value to others. And even if that's a smile to the checker at Walmart or holding the door, but seeing an opportunity. And this is, the Warrior Heart movement really is a lot of helping men to restore the heart that God gave them, and for them then to have the courage to live from it, to go bring light and love and healing to the world. So that would be one of the plugs. And I think daily, like Mother Teresa says, hey, if you want to change the world, start where you're at. If you want to go to Africa and all that, but just start where you're at, making a difference, and it'll come back to you. I mean, you'll feel it.
Nice.
But yeah, people can. What were you going to say?
That was it. I was going to say cool, and then tell people about where they find you.
Yeah, you can find me at DougSpeaks.com. That's just DougSpeaks.com. And that would be my website. Also, they can call me directly at 801-391-4356. If they wanted to text or reach out that way. And those are the ways to get a hold of me. Probably the easiest.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It's been super cool to be able to do it. Let me give one quick plug to our charity focus. As people know, on the Broken Brain, we like to take a local charity, local to some area, and plug that throughout the month. And this month we are looking at the charity Bake Their Day, which is a nonprofit organization in Guam with a small team of individuals. And we're coordinating an interview right now because I thought they sounded so cool. So that will either have aired or not by the time we do this. So I just realized I haven't figured out the order of things. Anyways, so you may have already heard that episode, but you're hearing me talk about it. So Bake Their Day is a nonprofit bakery where they make birthday cakes specifically for youth in custody in one form or another, some who are in different kinds of facilities or particularly detention centers who might not usually be having the experience of having their birthday, treated as a special day and having a cake and a song, brought to them. And so I just thought it was such a cool charity. We're focused on that for this month. So go to baketheirday.org. You can learn more about their work and donate. And as I always like to say with any charity, it never costs anything to just forward the link. If you're in a position where that's how you can help out, you're scrolling anyway, drop it on there. Anyone who is a member of our Patreon supporting the program, really want to give a big shout out and thanks to y'all. Those who are new members this month, 50% of your donation will go to Bake Their Day for the duration of your monthly membership, just like is the case for everybody who has joined whatever the charity of highlight was in the month that they joined as well. 50% of that goes to those organizations each month. Doug, thanks. This is great. We finally pulled it together. We're going to have to do this again sometime in the next 10 years.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. I'd love to come back anytime. You let me know. Thanks for all the work you're doing. I mean, look at the love, light, and healing you're sharing. So thank you, Dwight, for all you're doing.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.
If you like paranormal, true crime, and some cryptids, or just anything weird, check out Ouch, Was That a Ghost? Brought to you by your host, Liz. You can find Ouch, Was That a Ghost on Spotify, Apple, or any audio platform. New episodes drop every Thursday.